Our fight to eradicate corruption, maladministration, unethical leaders, and the abuse of taxpayers' money by those in power continues. It's fresh, it's fearless, and focused. The Outer Hour, where your voice matters.
Hello and welcome to The Outer Hour. I'm Tom London with you for the next 60 minutes. Tonight we talk about one of the most important issues South Africa faces, our current power crisis. How do we dig ourselves out of the mess? Well, the president a few nights ago addressed the nation and put his plan forward to you, to me. He said, I'm going to engage Eskom. I'm going to visit power plants. I'm going to combat the criminal activity. I'm going to ask trade unions for support. I'm going to import power from SADC countries who have a surplus. I'm going to remove red tape. I'm going to remove generation restrictions. I'm going to invest in more wind, solar and battery storage. I'm going to allow municipalities to source their own power. I'm going to encourage South Africans to invest in solar themselves, put it on their roofs and feed back into the grid. Of course, we'll talk about the proposed solar levy. And that, in a nutshell, is what President Cyril Ramaphosa said to us, South Africans. This is how we fix the problem. What I want to know from you is beyond the nitty-gritty, which we'll get into tonight. I'd like to know if you've got confidence in this plan. I think confidence in South Africa is just at an all-time low. Business confidence, the confidence of the average South African when they walk into the supermarket to buy something that cost R5 more than it did a week ago. Fuel prices are going up. It's not an easy environment to operate and live in at the moment, South Africa 2022. So that's first up on the agenda tonight. We'll also be taking a look at the aftermath of the KZN floods. You know, the media likes to give you the headlines when it's happening, but what happens a few months later? What's the story 6 months later? What's the story a year later? How is KZN doing? If you're from KZN, we want your input this evening. In the latter half of the show, we'll have Tim Tyrrell in the studio detailing what he sees in KZN and the actions that are or aren't being taken. But let's start off with the energy conversation. And once again, a reminder that you are, there are three of us in the discussion on energy tonight, at least three of us. Tim might chip in. But Chris Yellen joins us, an energy expert. We'll pop Chris on the screen quickly. There's Chris over there. And there's me. And then there's you on the other side of the camera. I would like you to comment on these issues. These are big issues, and I'd like your honest and open comments. Do you have, and the first question I'm going to throw at you tonight is, do you have confidence? What's your confidence level when it comes to the president's proposed solutions to South Africa's energy problems? That's the first question I'm throwing at you. You can pop your comments and questions in the comment section down below this video, and I will put them on screen. We'll put them to Chris. We'll bash them about. That's what this show's about, sharing ideas, sharing our thoughts, sharing our comments, and answering the difficult questions to try and find some solutions in this country we call South Africa. So, first question to you tonight as you watch this live broadcast on both YouTube and Facebook is, do you have more confidence now in the future of energy generation in South Africa than a week ago? What are your confidence levels like? I'd like to know. We'll also say hello to you as you join us on the show. I see a lot of people are joining already. And I see Spiwe's here. I see Claire Feldman's here. I see Michael John Billsbury's here out of the Eastern Cape. Jeff P. Scott is here. A lot of regular viewers here. And just a reminder, as you join us, if you haven't hit that like button, if you haven't hit the share button, please do so now. Nomsa Daele. Hello, Nomsa. Good to see your name on the screen again. Wandise Boyd. Lovely to see your name on the screen again. A lot of returning viewers tonight. Please share the program. Stella Tsuras Fanikak, we miss you when you're not here. Brendan Slade, an outer team member, joins us tonight. Hi, all, loving the energy here tonight. Well, let's hope that the lights don't go off. We've had that once or twice on the show. Michael Fanikak joins us. Christine Finnis, Fikile Dada, Dijeng Sebusi. How's it, Dijeng? How are you, my brother? Good to have you on board, and nice to see you. Michael Fanikak is energized for the debate. Craig Kent says evening, all, and the great outer team. Devaney Davids, the show's producers, on board. Masejo and Samantha are moderating comments tonight. Rudy Heineke is on board. Alex Elzov's on board. Di Gibson's on board. And more will join us. Leonard van der Leitgaarden. Bronwyn Heath says zero confidence. So we start right there, shall we? There's the first comment from you. I say average South African. You might not be. You might be living in a 10-bedroom house with a couple of Ferraris in the garage and your surname's Agliati. I don't know. But for me and for most people I meet, these are serious issues, and I count myself, as most people I meet do, as just an average South African wanting to make it through life and not have a heck of a hard time doing it. Zero confidence, says Bronwyn. Do you share Bronwyn's thoughts on this issue of solar and the solutions? Is there zero confidence in your mind? Let's ask Chris Yelland. He's an energy expert, knows more about electricity, how to make it, how to share it, how to sell it, how to consume it, how to store it than anybody else, anybody else I know. So let's ask Chris what his confidence levels are like. Chris, come on, honest answer. Are you confident after watching the president's address to the nation and taking a look at the plan?
I'm a lot more confident than I was a few months before the plan. We've been waiting for this plan. A lot of ideas have been put on the table. There's been a lot of consultation all around and getting input from every kind of source. And I think the plan is comprehensive. It is far-reaching, and it really puts some important changes on the table. Of course, we should have been doing it a long time ago.
Well, that was the first thing I thought of, Chris, when I looked at things like putting solar panels on the roofs of houses and feeding back into the grid. There are other countries that have done it. We've been discussing it on the show for a year now. And it seems that the time to have started something like that was 5 years ago. Is it a little too late?
No, it's not too late. Of course, we should have been doing it 5 years ago, but it doesn't help to cry about that now. We've got to get out of this moaning and naysaying and negative mindset. We've got to know that it is possible to end load shedding within 2 years, for sure. But it takes a significant effort. It takes for the country working together. I don't even want to hear the naysayers and the do-littles of this world who sit around doing nothing but moaning. It's time. I mean, it doesn't help.
Let me speak.
What we should have done 5 years ago.
And I agree with you on a purely logical level. I absolutely agree with everything you say. But I want to defend the naysayers and play devil's advocate, right? Because I'm looking at the comments coming up on the screen. Claire Feldman. I'm just going to throw a couple at you. I've got a question, right? Zero confidence. These plans were discussed 10 years ago. Zero happened. Rayford Liebenberg. Evening. No confidence in the plan. Brian Blythe. Good evening, outer. Oh, sorry, that's an evening. Clive Beckett, below zero is Clive's confidence. None whatsoever. I'll look for more. Keith Sorensen, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I'll pop some more comments on there, but I mean, there's this prevailing sentiment amongst a lot of people that we've heard all these promises from politicians before. And even if the promises sound good, the implementation is the problem. We're dealing with a broken Eskom. We're dealing with problems with trade unions. We're dealing with problems with sabotage. The problems are multifaceted, and it sounds good if you're a naysayer, to listen to the president say these are the solutions, but perhaps the confidence is actually in the implementation, the management structures of SOEs, the kind of business dealings we've seen in the past. Perhaps zero confidence that these kind of deals that are being put together will be done without corruption. That's the kind of confidence I'm picking up looking at the viewers and the comments tonight. How do you apply a salve, a Band-Aid or a Panado to the naysayers, as you put it? How do you convince those amongst us who go, really, in a nutshell and in a line, we've heard all of this before?
So what must we do? Must we do nothing? Must we sit around saying that, we should have done this 5 years ago, we don't believe it's possible? This is a deep plan. It is far-reaching. I think it addresses the issues. Of course, there are going to be implementation issues. Of course, it's not going to be plain sailing. But if we as a nation don't get behind this plan, we will get nowhere.
How do we get behind the plan?
Worse.
How do we get behind the plan?
Well, you see, it's not about government doing something. This is not about government can't deliver anything in the next 2 years, other than removing the red tape and blockages and stumbling blocks and bureaucracy that is holding this country back. The solutions are not going to come from government. The solutions are not going to come from Eskom. Eskom can't deliver new generation capacity in the next 2 years. It doesn't have the finances. It doesn't have the skills. The solutions are going to come from us, from domestic users of electricity, commercial, on the rooftops of buildings, on factories, on warehouses, on parking lots, from commerce and industry, from mining companies and farmers. All of us, and also municipalities, are all, and Eskom is going to play a certain role, but the role it's going to play is not to build anything. It is just to make it available, make land available, make connections to the grid available, reduce any bureaucracy and red tape, and of course make sure that the grid is ready to connect this new generation capacity. So there are things that Eskom has to do, but Eskom cannot build the generation capacity.
Well, let me ask you this question.
Only we can.
Is this the end of Eskom, or at least the end of the Eskom monopoly?
Yes, it's the end of the Eskom monopoly. There is a quiet revolution taking place in electricity, not only in South Africa, but around the world. The days of monopoly suppliers are over. It's time that the customers are calling the shots. And that is what's happening globally. The customers are the solution, not the utilities. The utilities like Eskom are not going to suddenly disappear overnight, but their share of the market is changing. And there, instead of being one generator in South Africa, there's going to be about 5 or 6 former Eskom generators, a number of public-private partnership generators, a number of municipal generators, a couple of hundred independent power producers, and literally thousands and thousands of generators from the domestic, commercial, industrial, mining, agriculture, transportation sectors of South Africa are all going to become in due course part of the solution. Eskom's share of this market is no longer going to be a monopoly. It already is changing. And as I say, there is a quiet revolution taking place. Do you know there are 27,000 unauthorized low voltage solar PV systems connected to the Eskom grid that do not have Eskom permission? It's just happening. It's like e-tolls. If it's too difficult to comply with all these regulations, people will just do it because it makes economic sense. It's the right thing to do, and it's happening quietly, whether government likes it or not.
Well, let's focus on that word government for a second, because here's a comment from Cello. It's a bit too big to fit on the screen, but Spiwe says, zero confidence in the plan. He came in while we had load shedding. Still nothing has changed, but rather things get worse. And I think that's pointing to, we've heard this before. We've heard it from the president before. We've heard it for years and years and years. Is that part of the problem, that we haven't had delivery for such a long time that when a good plan is presented to us, we don't buy it?
What is Sipiwe's plan? What is Tom's plan? What is your plan? Every one of you out of there, what are you doing about it? That's what you should be asking. There are things that you can do. And you've got to remember that it's your problem and you have to take ownership of your own energy future. That's what business are doing in the quiet revolution.
Yeah.
They're making plans so that they can have additional resilience, that they can improve their security of supply, that they can control their costs going forward, and that they can reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. What are you doing? I ask everybody.
All right, so now you've asked me directly, and I've got a bit of a problem answering that, because I rent a place that has solar power, that has batteries, that probably could feed back to the grid. So I guess I'm part of the solution and not part of the problem. But not every South African's in my position, where they are renting a nice off-the-grid property, or have 180 or 200,000 rand to pump into solar PV, PV panels on the roof and battery storage. But let's talk about that as a potential solution, as part of the solution for just a second. This story of put in solar panels on the roofs of our houses, and then the excess power we feed back into the grid, which the president has said will belong to Eskom. The grid, it seems that that's going to be Eskom's core business 20, 30 years from now, is just transmitting power. And you've said that on the show before. That's the way it should be. So we're going to be, as ordinary South Africans, part of this generation solution. How much of a solution is that in the grander scheme of things? If we all start this, I mean, I'm not sure how quickly we can roll this out and what the finance solutions are, whether the stock's available, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the logistics, I've got no clue. But it sounds good, and it's something that I would buy into if I was a South African going, oh, okay, I can put some panels on my roof, consume some electricity, sell some back. Maybe it even becomes a bit cheaper for me to do things that way. How short are we on power? If I remember correctly, I think the president said we're short of about 6,000 megawatts. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris. But how far does that one step that South Africans can take go in sorting out this problem? How big a solution is just that one step, the solar panels on roofs?
Well, yes, the president has said we need about 6,000 megawatts, but that's understating it. We need more. Quite a bit more, a lot more.
So why is the president telling us 6,000?
Well, you see, you do need a 6,000 to close the gap, but that's not enough. We don't just need to close the gap. We need to build a generation reserve so that there's extra spare generation available so that Eskom can shut down a couple of its generators and do the necessary maintenance. At the moment, we have load shedding. There is no generation reserve. If Eskom wants to do maintenance, it has to switch off generators to do that maintenance, and that means more load shedding. So we've got to first close the gap, then we've got to build some generation reserve. It gives Eskom that spare headroom in order to do the necessary maintenance and slowly improve its plant performance. And then, of course, there's Eskom power stations that are going to come off the grid. They're reaching the end of life. We have to decarbonize in a planned program, and we have to build new generation capacity to replace that old generation capacity. So it's a never ending. It's not a case of building 6,000 megawatts and the problem goes away. We've got to build basically about 3,000 or 4,000 megawatts every year from now on forever. You can't stop for 20 years. That's why we are where we are, because we stopped for 20 years.
Well,
you have to do this all the time.
I accept that. Here we've got a comment from Craig Kent. It's one word, Gwede. And I want to bring Minister Mantashe into the issue of, let me call it the issue of Minister Mantashe into the conversation. Because it seems when that 100 megawatt threshold was announced, it was announced by the president. The words we were getting from the minister were slightly different. We've been hearing about coal and nuclear from the minister forever now, and then the president comes along and doesn't include power or nuclear in the speech at all. Is this a sign that the presidency is actually taking control of a major part of the ministry, and the minister himself, his solutions, his proposals are going to fall by the wayside? And is there any political fallout that could come from that?
Well, the political space is highly contested, and we are in a very dangerous time. We're in a time as the lead up to the ANC elective conference. Political turmoil and contestation is what happens at this time. You know that the Zondo Commission has come out and it's fingered a lot of politicians. You know that there's this Fala incident with the president. And you know that the ANC elective conference is coming up. This is seriously high-risk times. If, for example, the president is forced to step aside following his own rule, I'm not saying it will happen, but if it presents the opportunity for more populist leaders who really know absolutely nothing about electricity, who have not consulted widely, who don't have the answers like the president has, those kind of people taking control, I believe, would pose massive risks to the South African economy. So yes, there is political contestation.
That might be the minister calling you now. I don't like what you're saying, Chris Jolinde.
Hang on.
Could be your grandkids. I don't know. Could be the wife.
Anyway, what I'm saying is that, yes, Gwede Mantashe is increasingly isolated and out of step with his cabinet colleagues and out of step with the presidency and Operation Vulindlela and the Presidential Climate Commission. And his statements are often contradictory and causing confusion and policy uncertainty and investor uncertainty, and that's not a good thing. His arm is being twisted. It was twisted over the 100 megawatt limit, and now that 100 megawatt limit has been lifted completely. And you know what? Unfortunately, that's what the president has said, but still, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy has got to actually change Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act in order for that to have any force. Because at the moment there is a binding statutory requirement that there is a 100 megawatt limit that has to be limited. There is an administrative process necessary to do that. And the person who's in charge is the minister, Gwedi Mantashe. So there's a lot of things that he has to do. And I hope his arm is being twisted.
Well, this is where it gets
painful.
This is where it gets interesting, because the president promised. Well, firstly, the president said South Africans, he used the words are fed up, and I think that's putting things politely. But he also promised that, removing red tape was a big part of the plan. Removing the red tape that allows Andre de Ruyter at Eskom to not have to get hold of the ministry to spend $70,000 on something, or removing the red tape when it comes to licensing, etc. But these power generation solutions will still report to NERSA, and as you mentioned, the ministry will still have to adapt and amend parts of the act. So while we're talking about removing red tape, the first obstacle to getting there is the red tape in the ministry.
Indeed. So there has to be some arm twisting, and ultimately, it's a democratic process, and ultimately, if you don't have the support of your colleagues, you get overruled. That's what happened over the 100 megawatt limit. Gwedi Mantashe was pushing for a 10 megawatt limit. It eventually was lifted 10 times higher than what Gwedi Mantashe wanted. And he said that the country would, there'd be big problems in the electricity supply industry if it was lifted above 10 megawatts. Well, it was lifted to 100 megawatts, and what that did is it enabled a lot of new generation capacity. And by lifting the generation capacity completely is going to enable more generation capacity. So, yes, it needs a bit of arm twisting, and that's what's happening. And if one is a Democrat, and if one abides by what the majority says, you will have to fit in with that. So I think certainly the presidency is, the people in the presidency and in Operation Vulindlela are really driving change, and that's important and good in my opinion.
Well, I like to think of myself as a bit of a Democrat. I believe in democratic principles and quite enjoy living in a democracy. If I was the big boss, I would just get rid of the minister. That is the cause of the red tape and the direction we don't want to take and the drama. I started this conversation with a comment on political solutions and political problems, and you did mention elective conferences and all of these things that influence decisions like this. Well, look, the president's taken a stand. And if it has, if South Africans have to ride roughshod over the ministry to get to where we want to be as a South Africa that generates power efficiently and effectively, then swing it to the DG in the president's office, and let's deal with the presidency on this issue. If this is what the presidency promises, let's hold the presidency and the president himself to these promises. I think that's a good start. Both people in his party and South Africans.
I believe we need to get behind the presidency and support him to do what is right and to hold the presidency accountable for making it happen. But remember, the presidency cannot actually deliver the goods. You and I can deliver the goods.
All right, so it's our turn.
So we have got to become part of the solution.
No, so not
part of the armchair critics.
So I got no problem with that, right? I think, you know what, if the potholes aren't being filled, hey, let's work out how to fill the potholes ourselves. And to heck with local governments and people who aren't doing their jobs properly and budgets being squandered. And yeah, I do understand the sentiment of South Africans who are gatvol saying, hold on a moment, we pay taxes for you guys to do this on our behalf. But I do see a silver lining on a cloud, a dark cloud, where when we take action as South Africans, when we fix the potholes, when we start generating our own solar power, when we take that into our own hands, that's when we'll see real change. I'm totally with you. I've lost confidence in politicians and many government workers, I got to tell you, and I think a lot of South Africans feel the same. So I don't see that responsibility that we're going to take upon ourselves to generate electricity as an absolute hardship. Perhaps it's the opportunity we need as South Africans for the first time to take something as important as electricity generation, take it into the private sector, take it into our hands and sort this problem out once and for all. I want to, sure, there are a lot of comments coming in here. One of them was, I just want to stick with the solar panels on roofs issue for a moment because a lot of South Africans are going to be thinking about this now. And somebody mentioned in the comment section that at 250,000 Rand or so for a proper power solution for the average home, who's got the money to afford it? Have you got some examples of international initiatives or what people may be doing overseas to make it easier for someone to put panels on the roof and battery storage? I know that Elon Musk has a company that leases these panels out. Are those the kind of business models we're going to see in the future? Is this actually an opportunity for business people? I'm thinking of Clive Beckett, who owns businesses. Should business people that are looking to invest and looking for opportunities be looking at this space right now and saying, right, I'm going to supply, I'm going to install, or I'm going to finance? How do we get past that high upfront cost?
Yeah, look, there's a whole lot of initiatives and opportunities out there. So the first thing is to enable what is called a feed-in tariff. A feed-in tariff will enable you to generate into the grid and be compensated for this to earn money by being your own generator. The second kind of incentive is tax incentives. I don't know if you're familiar, but a company, the capital expenditure in a rooftop solar PV system can be expensed in the year of its construction. That means if you structure this financially correctly, you can actually operate with a positive cash flow from day one. In other words, it's not costing you money even from day one because of that tax write-off. It changes the economics of it. Unfortunately, at the moment, that is not available to domestic installations. It's only available to businesses. Mm-hmm. So if you were to change the tax environment so that that would apply to individuals as well, that would significantly improve the business case and the incentive to put it in. Then there are a whole lot of other activities like banks. I'm not sure if you saw that Nedbank have now made arrangement. If you want a bond, if you've got a bond with Nedbank, they will just increase the value of the bond. You can put in a solar PV system and just pay it off with your bond. I mean, you say 250,000. Well, I've just got a quote. It's 150,000 for the system that I'm looking at.
Sure.
And yes, that's a lot of money. Of course it is. But, we buy a house for R1 million or 2 million Rand, not even, that's a sort of a medium-sized house. So, in fact, it's not a big part of your bond. It's not insignificant, but it can be financed by banks these days. There are also things like aggregators coming where people will rent your roof space. You won't even own your solar PV system. All you'll do is rent your roof space to someone who will come along and install a system that they will own. And they will get the benefit, the commercial benefit, and you will get some benefit out of it too, because you're going to sit back in your armchair and get a rent on every month from the roof space that you were not earning any money on before. There's a whole lot of new business opportunities that are opening up. These things are happening around the world. They could happen in South Africa if we just unloosen the unholy grip of NERSA, the DMRE, and government on this space.
Still more work to be done. Eh? Now, I've got to ask you this question because I saw a comment in the comment section, and we've spoken about this on the show for how many years? 3 years now. Whenever the electricity generation issue comes up, we've had these chats. and you are Alta's energy expert, and you've been a vocal critic, Chris, of the plans that we've seen before and the problems we've seen. You've been outspoken when it comes to the problems and the dramas of our electricity supply problem. And tonight I'm sensing a lot of confidence from you. So much confidence that, Wood Zarko says, are you now speaking on behalf of the ANC, Chris Yellender? Have you turned? What's the story here? Why so much confidence in this, Chris? And it's noticeable.
It's the first plan that I've seen that has any credibility. Just take a look at it. Take a look at what it is saying. What I like about the plan is, first of all, it has been widely consulted. It is not just a populist plan. It has involved serious experts. It has involved labor. It's involved business at a very significant level. Mm-hmm. And I think the voice of the customer is being heard. And if you look at what it is proposing, I mean, you said, what examples are there in other countries? I'll give you an example of Vietnam.
Who's getting it right?
Vietnam has got a per capita GDP significantly less than South Africa. A couple of years ago, they started feed-in tariffs. They canned their nuclear program, which they were going to contract with Rosatom of Russia. They canned it completely. And instead, they embarked on a renewable energy program. And in last year, they installed 9,000 megawatts of rooftop solar PV in the domestic and commercial space alone. That's not so. If you were to look at what can be delivered in 1 year by putting the right environment in place, that's what can be delivered by a country that was devastated by war, that has built itself up and is still building itself up, and that's what it can deliver. In South Africa, our resources of wind and solar are significantly better than Vietnam's, number one. Number two, our current state of economic development is better. Number three, we've got a very significant mining and industrial base that also has got very serious plans on delivering much bigger systems to their system, to their energy mix. I'm talking about plants of 50 megawatts, 60, 100 megawatts, even 200 megawatts. Sasol has got plans to build 900 megawatts of solar PV and wind for wheeling power across the grid to its site in Sasolburg and in Secunda. South 32 could build 1,000 megawatts. Municipalities are talking about, I'm talking about the metros, are talking about 500 megawatts each. There's 5 of them. That's 2,500 megawatts. You add up all these different sectors together. Honestly, we can do great things in this country and quickly. And that is what you will see in this plan. Yes, there are also plans to improve Eskom's performance. Yes, there are, plans to speed up the public procurements, but none of those plans will deliver in the short term. The only thing that can deliver in the short term, I'm talking about the next 2 to 3 years, is the private sector. And as I said, residential, commercial, industrial, mining, agricultural, and transportation customers being part of the solution. That is the 2 to 3 year option. And that is what is in the plan.
Let's dig into the nitty-gritty for a second. Excuse me, I'm looking at the comments coming in. There's fantastic interaction in the comments section tonight, and lots of interesting comments and questions. And of course, we're not going to find the solution to all of our problems in 60 minutes, but I'm loving the engagement this evening, so keep it coming. We'll dip into that comment section as we move through the show. One of the things I picked up on in the plan was buying power from our neighboring countries, our SADC countries, who the president says they have a surplus. And I must tell you, that caught me by surprise, because my assumption was that we were supplying these countries with power. They were keeping their lights on while our lights are off. And I assumed that they didn't have enough power, which is why they're buying it from South Africa. So could you give us the ins and outs on actually how much power is available in our neighboring countries for us to purchase?
Well, we at the moment import about 1,500 megawatts from Mozambique. Quite a significant amount of electricity comes from Mozambique. We also import, where there is surplus capacity on our neighbors, there's a thing called the Southern African Power Pool. And this is a way of trading electricity. When a country has excess or surplus energy, they can trade it on a day-ahead market. And it's like a stock exchange where you can buy, day ahead. Spare generation capacity. When South Africa's got a shortage, it can buy on the power pool. When South Africa's got a surplus, as does happen, I can tell you on occasion, we can export it and earn money. So it's a very important balancing mechanism between supply and demand. Zambia at the moment has got surplus. Botswana has got surplus. Namibia has contracts. We have a 3-year contract with Namibia to supply them with electricity. It's not a hell of a lot of electricity, I might tell you. And what I'm really trying to get at is that the trading of electricity in the Southern African power pool is not bad. It is good. It is good for us. It is good for business. It makes money for South Africa, and it does not impact really negatively on the supply-demand situation.
Okay.
In fact, it can help us, as it is going to
Okay,
help
got
us,
it.
as we've seen.
Got it. All right. Teresa Gunning, once you mention a political party on the show, then it comes in quicker. The rebuttal. Teresa Gosling says it's not his plan. The DA suggested this. And the reason I'm bringing this particular comment up is because the president announced that local municipalities and municipal regions and cities would be able to source power themselves. And so, we've already heard the city of Cape Town saying they're planning to get off grid as fast as possible. They join Orania when it comes to that. But do you see this happening more and more? I mean, could the city of, we've mentioned Nigel before, could the town or the city of Nigel decide, hey, we're going to make our own power and we'll buy it from a company that sets up a power generation plant nearby? Do you expect a lot of that?
Firstly, I just want to answer the listener. I don't care if it's a DA plan or an ANC plan. It makes absolutely no difference to me. I couldn't care. I just want it to work. If the ANC are adopting the DA's plan, well, who cares? Wonderful. Mm-hmm. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, try something else. It's the same. So I don't get involved in this party political sort of one-upmanship. Not of my concern. The other question are, what municipalities can actually do this? Well, first of all, they need to be credit-worthy municipalities. If you want to sign a power purchase, well,
we know from the Auditor General's report that very few actually are credit-worthy.
That's right. So, if you want to enter into a power purchase agreement for 20 years with an independent power producer, you actually, the off-taker, that is the municipality, needs to be credit-worthy. Otherwise, the banks won't fund it. Okay, so the thing is, the credit-worthy municipalities are able to do this. Certainly, a city of Durban, a city of Cape Town are probably the most advanced. City Power, Johannesburg, has got plans. Ekurhuleni's got plans. Tshwane's got plans. Port Elizabeth has got plans, Nelson Mandela Bay, but they are less credit-worthy. It's going to happen with the credit-worthy first. Mm-hmm. And Cape Town is probably the most credit-worthy at this point in time. And Cape Town is certainly, I would say, leading the pack, leading the thinking.
Sure.
They've got a very advanced thinker in their head of energy, a man called Mr. Kadri Nasip. He is highly regarded, he is forward-looking, and he's doing great things for the city of Cape Town's energy and electricity sector.
Here's a comment from Ronnie Naidu. Ronnie says, Eskom was mismanaged. What has been done to all those comrades who've been stealing? Get the monies back from all of them. says Ronnie. The outer follows that comment up with, we need to see them in orange overalls. Let me ask you how big an issue this is, right? Firstly, the sabotage that we've seen at our power stations, the president himself has spoken about it, as well as the corruption and the mismanagement that happens inside our SOE. Let's assume that that doesn't get any better. Can this plan still work? With guys chopping down, pylons and putting rocks in coal and the kind of stuff we've seen lately?
Yeah, that sort of stuff has caused a decline in the performance of the plant, and will continue to cause such a decline in performance if allowed to continue unabated. That's why in the plan you will see some time and effort has been spent in the plan about policing and cutting out the kind of fraud and corruption that we've seen at a number of power stations. Some of them are in a shocking state. Some of them, the spares have all been stolen. So, you want to do maintenance, but the spares have been stolen. You can't do maintenance in that sort of situation. So it needs this holistic plan. It's no good sorting out one part of it and saying you're going to do extra maintenance. If first of all, you don't have money to buy spares. If number two, when you do buy spares, the spares get stolen, you have to deal with all of these problems. The plan sounds quite complex, but these are quite complex issues. Yes, we've all got to pull together to make this thing happen. But if we just allow it to carry on the way it is, then the plant performance will not improve. That I can tell you.
Here's what's going through my mind at the moment and what I'm thinking. This plan looks good on paper. I'm certainly not going to knock it. I've run through the plan. I've looked at it. It's what we've been talking about on the Outer Hour for 3 years now. Most of the solutions that are on this piece of paper were solutions that have been proposed on this show. And you're talking about cooperation. You're talking about cooperation between private sector, big business, investors, as well as trade unions. The president himself has asked for the support of trade unions in becoming part of the solution and not an obstacle to decent power supply in South Africa. So much on my list here tonight. We're not going to get through all of it this evening, but there are two things I wanted to ask you before we go. We'll talk about the KZN issue. We've got just a couple of minutes to deal with this. One is the story of battery storage. Chris, the president mentioned that, and lots of numbers sitting in my head. I think it was 500 megawatts of battery storage that will be coming online.
That's one procurement. One procurement.
Right. There's a lot of, I suppose there's been a lot of debate, perhaps not so much at the moment, but how important is battery storage for South Africa, seeing that we're pushing towards wind and solar, which aren't there all the time?
Look,
and how feasible is it? Yeah.
Yeah, of course it's very feasible. It's happening all around the world in a big way. Not just battery storage. There's a whole lot of different forms of energy storage. The most common of which is a hydroelectric power station, which is like a big battery, and you generate power from the potential energy stored in the water flowing through the dam. We have some of those already. We got storage on the Orange River. Then we have what is called pumped water storage schemes. We have one in the Drakensberg, the Ingula and the Drakensberg pump station. There's one in Cape Town called Palmit. So South Africa has got quite significant storage already. These are pumped water storage, but there are many other technologies, and the most promising emerging new technology is battery energy storage, and it's making huge inroads, around the world. And in fact, South Africa is going to become one of the world's bigger markets for battery energy storage. Eskom has already procured several hundred megawatts through a loan from the World Bank. And there's going to be a new public procurement process for another 500 megawatts, as the president announced. And let me tell you, at the domestic, commercial, and industrial level, battery energy storage on the customer's premises is big, and it's going to get very big.
Okay, so that's a real solution.
Yeah, it's part of the solution. These are all, it's not just one. It's not just the residentials and the commercial sector,
sure.
Industrial sector, mining sector, the utility sector. These are all, and battery storage is part of all of these.
Now, our eagle-eyed Outer Hour viewers have spotted something that I wanted to bring up and wrote on my list of questions tonight. This one comes from Brian Cotter. Was a mobile generator a car powership. And the reason I'm putting this up on screen is, seen as the president is talking about removing red tape and restrictions, does that mean that this car powership deal that Outers had its eyes on for some time could slip nicely past the red tape and the regulations that that civil society has been holding their feet to the fire on? What are your thoughts on car powerships? Are they busy fueling up to go home, or are they going to find permanent residence in our bays?
Well, there was some talk at one point, and I even felt that it could be useful, but people have pointed out the dangers of it, and that is to declare a state of emergency or a state of disaster, in which case government is given extraordinary powers to promulgate new legislation and regulations that would override and overrule the normal. So in the states of emergency, government gets given extraordinary powers to do things that it wouldn't otherwise be able to do. However, in the president's plan announced the other night, he specifically excluded that and said, no, we are not going to declare a state of emergency or a state of disaster. That has certain legal implications, and he doesn't want to go down that road. Thinking about it now, that works against car powership, because there are a whole lot of things that are blocking the car powership. Let me just list them. Number one, they don't have environmental authorization. There's an appeal in progress. Number two, they don't have ports authorization. Number three, they don't have a pipeline license. Number four, they don't have a power purchase agreement with Eskom. And number five, there's 3 legal cases, including Ouster's legal case, challenging the award of generation licenses to car powership. Now, if there was a state of emergency or a state of disaster, by decree, they would be able to override those legal requirements. But the president said he's not going to declare a state of emergency or a state of disaster. So I think the legal processes will still be binding, and therefore they have still got a whole lot of legal hurdles to cross before it becomes a possibility.
Well, Chris, I'm going to chat to Tim Tyrrell about what he's seen in KZN post the floods in just a moment. But my last question, because people have been talking about this in the comment section, the solar levy. Someone mentioned a little earlier that government only does things when they can see money coming in for themselves. So is that part of the trick here? That we get everyone to put solar panels on and we just hit you with a solar levy and you'll be paying another tax?
Now, I think there's been a lot of media confusion, and I think it's been fueled by some very poor communication from Eskom. There are a new tariff that is being looked at called the HomeFlex tariff, and it's not yet promulgated. It hasn't been through the public process. It hasn't been through NERSA, and it's not in place yet. In fact, it hasn't been announced publicly yet. There are some documents around, about what is being proposed or thought about, but they're very far from being finalized. I think the media has got it a little wrong. It paints this as a big discriminatory action against solar PV users. In fact, there is no discrimination between a PV user and a non-PV user in the tariff itself. What is different about this tariff is that the fixed component, in other words, even if you use no electricity, there is quite a significant fixed cost that is called a network access cost. That is for having a grid connection, and that it works to, if you were putting in solar PV to reduce your electricity bill, if you did not have a fixed cost, you'd be able to reduce your electricity bill to zero. But because there's a fixed cost, even if you reduce your energy consumption to zero because of your solar PV system, you still have a fixed cost to pay every month. Now, you may see that as discriminating against solar PV, but it applies to all customers.
All right. This is an issue I'm sure we're going to talk about on future shows, and we're running out of time. In fact, we've gone a bit over on this, and I want to get to Tim. But Chris, thank you. You've generated a lot of debate and comments in the comment section tonight, and for that, I thank you. And look forward to our next discussion. That's Chris Yelland. Chris is Outers energy consultant, and he came on the show and he threw water in our eyes and said, hey, do something yourselves. And two things stand out for me here. One is this has been driven by the president and the presidency. As Chris mentioned a little earlier on, we've got the step aside story. We've got elective conferences coming up. If President Ramaphosa goes, I've got a feeling that this plan we're talking about could go out the window as well. So all of this plays into the political space and who you vote for and what happens politically in the future. And I'm sure we'll all keep our eyes on that. The second thing I'd like to comment on is just a personal thought as I'm listening to Chris Yellen throw the ball at us, is say, you know what, if the president has said to South Africans, business and like-minded South Africans like us, hey, be part of the solution, then perhaps us South Africans should say, thank you very much. We'll take the whole problem off your hands, and the finance companies and the generation companies and the investors and the average South Africans, you know what? We will sort it out ourselves. And so challenge accepted, Chris Yelland. What am I doing? I'm going to be part of the solution and with a bit of confidence, because it seems as if we're lacking a bit of that in the country at the moment. Now I'm not sure what our confidence levels. Thank you, Chris. I'm not sure what our confidence levels are going to be like after chatting with Tim Tyrrell, because Tim came on the show when the floods in KZN were happening, and we don't want to be a media show that just runs the headline one week and forget about it and never report back on it. So let's say how's it to Tim Tyrrell. How's it, Tim? Good to have you in the studio.
Good evening, Tom. Nice to be here.
It's nice to have a real life human being sitting in front of me. You described the damage and the problems that we saw in KZN when those horrific floods were happening. I mean, half of Umdloti was washed away, it seemed, but the entire province was affected. What's happened post-flood? What can you tell us, an eyewitness account of what's happening in KZN?
Look, there's no doubting the fact that the infrastructure damage was substantial. We were dealing with a once in a 50, once in a 100-year event, and that's what it's been billed as. That said, we find ourselves in a situation where the problem is exacerbated by poor management and poor administration. So there are things that can be done and there are things that are being done, but painfully slowly, and unfortunately the response hasn't been adequate.
Sitting high and dry up in Gauteng, we don't have to worry about any of this, and it's easy to focus on your own pocket of problems or regional problems. This, how big of a problem has this been to the daily lives of residents in KZN? What's the new normal?
Well, there are two issues here. One is the supply of drinking water, potable water, and the other is groundwater. The estimates are that something like 80% of the wastewater management infrastructure in the province or in the coastal belt of the province was either damaged or destroyed during the flood. Now, that's a kind of a convenient excuse in a sense, because what it has done also is it has showed up a number of fragilities and a number of shortcomings in the system, which are now obviously just being amplified by the event. As far as the supply of potable water is concerned, well, there's another issue, because the infrastructure supplying from raw water into purification works and purification works into the distribution and reticulation system, that has also broken down and fallen down in many cases. But there's a lot of skullduggery going on here, and unfortunately there's a lot of political issues as well. Let
me ask you this question, because I saw a comment from Clive Beckett, and Clive does that when he comes into the comment section. He goes like that. And Clive said, hey, we got a bigger issue. When we were talking about electricity just 20 minutes back, I saw Clive Beckett's comment was, the bigger issue in South Africa is going to be water supply and the water problems we've got. And I've been keen to get to you for that, because you've been sitting quietly during our conversation about electricity, a heated conversation. Have you been sitting there going, yeah, we'll sort the electricity out, we've got bigger problems like water? Well, did you agree with Clive?
Yes, I think I do to an extent. You must understand that the consumption of water and the availability of water is a far more fundamental need as far as the human race is concerned. One can get by, not comfortably admittedly, but one can get by with limited or with no electricity, but you can't live without water. So the supply of fresh water and usable water is absolutely mission critical. And unfortunately, the process and the supply system has become corrupted by all sorts of self-interest and other issues, some of which are still very murky and that one can't reveal the true state of affairs. But when one makes a couple of superficial inquiries, it's very clear that the supplier is not saying the same as the customer, and the customer is not supplying the consumers and ratepayers with, I'm talking about the eThekwini municipality.
Well, let's talk about government's promises. What has government promised you in KZN post-flood?
Very little, to be honest. There's been a reaction to the event, and unfortunately there's been an inadvertent or a disproportionate trading on the fact that the infrastructure is messed up. So there's always a string of excuses and very little promises. For example, in eThekwini, We have about 48% of the ratepayers in the city fed from one single purification works called Durban Heights. And the story goes that there was damage from the Nagel Dam, the aqueduct supplying that purification works, to the extent the city claims that was a 40% reduction in the raw water supply. If you inquire with Umgeni Water, who actually are responsible for that process, the reduction was from 540 megalitres a day down to about 500. So work that out, that's about 7.5%. So the city is saying we can now kind of redistribute and manipulate the distribution and supply process against the backdrop of a 40% reduction in supply. Well, apparently, and that needs further investigation because that's still very murky at this stage, that's not the case. Because if you look at the bulk supplier, they're saying, yeah, we have had a bit of a problem. There's 7.5%, maybe 10% down, but it's not 40%. So what's happening in the interim? What's happening in the meantime? You have tanker fleets, you have private interests, you have contracts going south, and all of the traditional problems which South Africans are so concerned about are coming to the fore in this space.
You know, the reason I find this conversation interesting is you're experiencing something as a province that the entire country could land up experiencing. You know, one crisis here, one crisis there, the infrastructure crumbles a little more, and all of a sudden we're in the same position as the position you're talking about. What's the solution? I mean, you're talking about murky. You've used the word murky a number of times. That's murky. That deal is, those details are murky. About as murky as some of our wastewater coming out of wastewater treatment plants. We've just spoken about a president's plan with like point-by-point solutions, and I'm sure these solutions are on the table when it comes to the water issues and the problems post the floods in KZN. But what's the real problem?
Well, I think we have to face the fact that South Africa is a water-scarce country. So we're grappling with a resource which is in limited supply. That said, Chris's comments earlier about taking responsibility and the citizen solution is...
You see, we don't like to hear that.
Well, it's uncomfortable. Of course it's
Are you going to tell me the same thing?
Up to a point, yes, because I do think that we need to take responsibility for our own circumstances. But given that there is a fundamental and constitutionally mandated right to the access to fresh water, there's a trade-off, if you like. So not all of us are capacitated or have the resources to be able to supply and look after ourselves. So therefore, the vast majority of the population is vulnerable. And they're the people who are really suffering in this space. And they, unfortunately, are the ones who have suffered the biggest deprivations as far as supply is concerned. Where you have relatively established infrastructure in the suburbs and in the established part of the country, yes, there are some problems, and there are many others. And
is government the problem?
In many cases, absolutely. Yes, it is. Because it's very poor administration. Let's not get into the political side of things, but let's talk about poor management and poor administration. It's right at the heart of the problem.
What's the solution then? Is the solution like the electricity problem we've got, private companies, citizens? Does the president need to do another address and say, hey, we've got a water crisis in this country and we're going to put more in the hands of private enterprise and the citizens? We know we can't do it, so we'll hand it over to the competent people.
I think the answer to that is a mixed bag. Those who can, should. Those who can't are still at the mercy of government and local administration, and that's where they need to come to the party.
What's life been like for you, personally?
Well, there's a whole litany of other problems. We have an interesting situation in eThekwini with the 48% supply coming out of Durban Heights that I told you about. That's roughly half the city's population, 2 odd million people. There was a schedule published, I think it was on the 15th of June, to come into effect on the 20th of June, which outlined a water rationing program, which was going to be in place until July of 2023. In my area, and I can't necessarily speak for anybody else, but this is a common issue. In my area, we were suffering water rationing at night time from basically sunset to sunrise for a month before that thing was even announced. Then, after the thing had been running for about 3 or 4 weeks, we suddenly found that for most nights we had water. Now, that's good news. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
That's good news. But the administration and the management behind it, the communication machinery which should be keeping the citizens informed and the ratepayers informed, is just simply not there. It's an impenetrable block where you try and get answers and some cogent explanations about what is going on and what's right and what's wrong and what is the current situation. You're not getting the information that you need, and that's what's frustrating everybody.
Who's getting hit the hardest? Is it the poor?
It's the poor. It's the indigent. It's those in, for example, here's another example. In the Tongaat community, which is middle to lower market, which is just on the north edge of Durban, their wastewater treatment plant and their water purification works were simply washed away. They were destroyed completely. So for the next 12 months, 18 months, while they rebuild, they had to put in a system of supplying water by tanker. And that has just been very, very poorly administered.
And I'm sure horrific. The conditions must be horrific for people living in informal settlements, for example.
Imagine what it must be like in a sub-economic house where the only water available is from a tanker, which doesn't pitch up when they say they're going to pitch up, when they say it's going to pitch up.
You
It's
mentioned
just
18 months on that one
horrendous.
particular plan. How long do you think it's going to take to get the province right?
Probably 5 years. And there are bits and pieces, certainly in the greater.
And is that mostly because of the damage and how extensive it is, or is it because of the problem we have with incompetence?
I think it's both. It's not quite as simple as saying it's one or the other. It's a combination of both. And what the flood, yes, of course, it was a horrific event. It
Yeah.
really was absolutely awful.
Yeah. No political party invited that.
No, exactly. But what it did do, it just simply broke open all the cracks. And it showed all the flaws in the system, and there are many.
Tim, we've got a lot of people listening and watching, and people will over the next couple of days. What's your message? I need to credit you properly. Tim Tyrrell is the CAN Regional Manager, Community Action Network, if I'm not mistaken. So, what would your message be to Outer Hour viewers and South Africans who are concerned about all of these issues that we raise on a weekly basis, electricity generation, and now we're highlighting the problems we have with infrastructure and rebuilding water infrastructure after a devastating flood. But in general, what would you say to people who are watching this show who, fed up using the president's terms?
Okay, there are many answers to that question. The first is if you can do something about it as far as your own circumstances are concerned, much like Chris was outlining with electricity, do it. If you are in a community where that's just simply not possible, there is a sleeping giant in our country, and that is the body of citizens at grassroots level. So we need to assemble and mobilize our communities to be able to push back and make sure that government are completely aware of just what our needs are, number one, and where they fall short of performance, which is required of them. It's what we pay taxes for, after all, that the citizens' groupings hold the feet to the fire. And that's where the CAN project comes in, but that's another discussion, and I hope we'll get an opportunity to unpack that in due course.
Anytime. You're more than welcome, Tim. It's lovely to have had you in the studio tonight. Is there anything
Thank
that
you
you
very
feel
much.
we haven't covered in this segment that you'd like to get across?
Oh, gosh, have you got a week? There's
We
lots.
could keep rolling.
Yeah, no, it's a big problem, and the province unfortunately has been hit with several whammies. We had the riots in July last year.
Yeah.
We've had flooding in 2 different occasions this year, once in February and once in April, and yeah, it's a province that's been rocked back on its heels, and there's a certain resilience there. People are keeping going, but there's a certain amount of frustration and anger, and I think it's politically and socially quite fragile.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank you, Tim Tyrrell, for joining us in studio this evening. It's been a pleasure having you in here, and I'm going to latch onto that word resilience that you dropped into the last answer. And just as I say goodnight to you on the other side of this screen, sitting somewhere in this beautiful, it's a beautiful country of ours, or you may be an expat worried about the conditions back home and looking for solutions too. That resilience is something that South Africans have in buckets. Sometimes I think we need a problem to be so bad, like the migraine needs to be so hectic that the only solution is going off to the chemist and buying the strongest headache tablets known to man to get rid of it. And the problems we've had in this country and the conversations we've had on Outer Hour for 3 years now have all pointed to the same solution. I'm not sure why it comes as a surprise to me or others when Chris Yelland and others say, hey, we are the solution, because that's something we've been preaching from the hymn sheet for quite some time now. And now that a president has said, okay, you'll be part of the solution, perhaps it's time for South Africans to say, you know what? The problem has been government and politicians all along. The problem has been corruption and maladministration and all of these things. We know the problem. The problem is the people who have been supplying the power and making the power and doing the deals. There's an opportunity here. In amongst the negativity, in amongst our gutfulness as a nation, there is an opportunity. There are many opportunities here if we just shift our thinking a degree or two to the left or the right. The fact that the government and the SOEs can't supply power to South Africa means that if we start supplying the power lies in our hands. And the more power we have as citizens of South Africa, the less power that government and their institutions have in South Africa, the better for all of us. Because if there is zero confidence in one thing amongst most people I know, and that's the power of politicians to solve problems. So may this be the show that sparks an interest in your life and in your mind tonight. May this opportunity that we've been presented by the presidency, may this be the catalyst for South Africans to say, yeah, government, you challenge us. Hey, you tell us, listen, South Africans, we can't fix it, you fix it. Well, let's bloody well fix it. Let's get together. Let's fix this problem. Let business climb in. Let organizations climb together. Let municipalities generate their own power. Let these things happen. And let's take more power into our hands. These non-political, non-money grabbing, non-corrupt hands that you and I own. I know that in an ideal world we pay our taxes and everything works perfectly, but this ain't an ideal world, and South Africa is not an ideal country. So let's take the power back. Let's put it in our hands. If government wants to give it to us, let's do it, is my message to you tonight. I'll leave you with that. Maybe a bit too much confidence, but don't shoot the messenger. Next Wednesday, 7 o'clock, we'll have another debate. We'll discuss another big issue. We'll challenge each other. We'll debate with each other. And we'll look for these solutions. And together, as South Africans, hold hands, man. Don't worry about the hand next to you, where it comes from, who they are, what their beliefs are. Let's just hold hands. Let's hold hands and build something. To heck with the people who have been holding us back. You can't hold a whole nation back when we're looking in, marching in the same direction. 7 o'clock next weekend. Can't wait to see you. It's going to be another great outer hour. And until then, from Chris Yelland, who's sat patiently in his comfortable armchair there. I want an armchair like that one day. That might have come from former President Mandela's house. It looked the same. Thank you, Chris, for joining us tonight. Tim Tyrrell for joining us in the studio. Thank you, Tim. And of course, you. Next week, 7 p.m. Wednesday. It's a date. Don't be late. Until then, I wish you bucks. I wish you love. I wish you good health. And most of all, I hope you join me again at 7 p.m. next Wednesday for another outer hour date. Until then, I miss you already.
Our fight to eradicate corruption, maladministration, unethical leaders, and the abuse of taxpayers' money by those in power continues. It's fresh, it's fearless, and focused. The Outer Hour, where your voice matters.